So buenas tardes todos. My name is Dr. Alvaro Huerta. We're here at Cal Poly Pomona. It's a virtual platform that we're using called Zoom. I don't really understand how I'm able to function with this technology since I still have a MySpace account. So I'm an associate professor at Cal Poly Pomona in Ethnic and Women's Studies and Urban Regional Planning. I'm also a fellow at the Harvard Divinity School. And I'm very excited to co-organize this event with our amazing librarian, Sally Romero, who's joining us. And we have two guests that are going to teach us about important issues that impact our communities, issues such as police abuse, but also teaching those of us who are of indigenous roots about maiz, and those of us who are not, to learn about the traditions of the people of the Americas. And then also we're going to have some help and discussion and leading us in some healing practices by Tania Pacheco. So the way it's going to proceed is I'll say a few comments. I'll introduce Dr. Rodríguez, and then he'll introduce Tania in the work that she does and what they do together in terms of their collaboration in putting these events together and talking about these very important issues that impact our communities. So with that said, just a few things about myself, because this is like therapy for me, so I always talk about myself. In relations to Dr. Roberto Rodríguez, whom I've known for many years, and why I invited him to this space. So both of us, we hail from East Los Angeles. We both attended the University of California. And we are both authors. And then the most important thing, and this is the most important thing, people, is that we're both good looking. So that is kind of what draws everybody's like, oh, you're such a good looking person, you know, like, how did you do it? And it's just something that's natural, people. And because
and modest.
And modest, yeah. And because of our good looks, we've been able to do all this work. So growing up in East LA, we're separated by one generation. Roberto experienced violence at a young age, Whittier Boulevard in 1979. And when I was a little bit younger, at 13, I experienced police abuse myself, but not at that level. So when I was 16, the police pulled me over and pointed a gun at me. Actually, prior to that, my dad gave me a gun because the homeboys wanted to jump him, and I was 13. So when you grow up in East LA and the mean streets, because not all the parts of East LA are violent or abusive in terms of the state, you know, you don't come out the same. You know, it has a negative impact on your psychic, and it's only through us to talking about it and sharing our stories that we can deal with it, and exposing how the state has repressed our people throughout history. We know a lot about Black Lives Matter, and all of us, I'm sure, we're all in solidarity, Black Lives Matter and everything they do. And we're here to share that it's important that we also look at state violence against brown people, against indigenous people, and then even the violence that takes place against Asian Americans with hate crimes and Muslims and so on and so forth. So I met Roberto, Dr. Rodríguez, in the mid 1980s, not 1880s, we're not that old. He visited us at UCLA as we were machistas, and he was talking about his book that he wrote, Assault with a Deadly Weapon. And he also was talking to us about a settlement that through a lawsuit, because of and I want him to talk about the case that he experienced based on the book, Assault with a Deadly Weapon, in where he was able to win a settlement. And with that, he created a magazine, I think it's called Emeritus, and he'll correct me on all that. And over the years, never stopped writing, never stopped teaching, especially us. And like my generation benefited from people like Dr. Rodríguez, in terms of opening doors for us to go to UCLA and other places, but also to be fearless. And he's no victim. I mean, he was abused by the police, but he's not a victim in the sense that he's voiceless. So he's used that traumatic experience. And at any point, Roberto, just correct me if I'm wrong, to use that traumatic experience, that defeat, in a positive way, channeling that and making it a victory and shedding light against atrocities that happen in our communities so that they can be prevented. So that we also fight and we also deserve respect as human beings and as the original people of this land that we sit on. Actually, I'm actually sitting right now, I'm not standing. I usually say stand on. So with that, I just want Roberto, talk to us a little bit, or Dr. Rodríguez a little bit. And I know you go by indigenous name also, and you can also talk to us about that, about what happened to you when you were in Whittier Boulevard, where I used to cruise with my brothers, my sister's 64 Impala, or I think it was 67. So talk to us a little bit about what happened in that famous case in 1979, where you were a young guy from the barrio taking photographs.
It's kind of a coincidence, but the whole issue of Zoot Suit. The sheriffs have what they call SEB. Okay, I can't resist saying SOB. Okay, they have the Special Enforcement Bureau. That's like SWAT for the LAPD. But the SEBs were out there, over 100 of them. Anyway, so that night, I mean, again, I was there all the time, but I had never seen it that packed. It was super packed. And when I got to this corner, there was this guy in the middle of the street talking about God, and anyway, usually I don't tell this story again, and over, but I'm okay right now because especially because Tanya's here.
Want me to tell it? I can tell it.
No, but I mean, it's okay. I was just wanting to let people know because this is about trauma and about re-traumatization. And I had to live with it and live with it even to this day. But what is the point? The point is it's worth it, because I know tons of people that live trauma, police violence, etc., the families and on and on. And to the last person, they'll say, you know what? We don't like to do it, but we have to do it. And I was a member of an organization of survivors of torture and political violence, same idea. So anyway, so I'm going to tell it, but I'm going to be brief, okay? Because, we don't have that kind of time to tell the whole story. But the point is that guy was out there in the middle of the night talking about God. And everybody was saying, hey, take his picture. And I was like, come on, take his picture. The guy's crazy. Middle of the night. And then when I saw the same guy, he had a sarade. He looked like Moses, like he was parting the Red Sea, he was parting the board, all the cruising. And so I said, you know what, that does look like a good program. So I started taking photos, and at that point, that's when the cops came. About 10 to 12 of them. They chased the guy about the equivalent of about three stores. And just for those that know the boulevard, if you go there today, there's an arch, it's a big arch. So it was right about there on the corner. There's a liquor store. It's called Whittier and McDonald. So he ran towards in the direction of downtown. So he ran about 3 stores. They got him and they beat the tar out of the guy, you know, vicious. And when I saw that, I said, you know, I better leave because my and I had already seen 100 lights, you know, everywhere, red and blue lights. So I was leaving, and since I grew up down the street and people knew I worked for Lowrider Magazine, they were like, "Hey, isn't that your job? Take photographs." And I said, "Yeah, that's my job, but I'm not crazy to go get killed." So when I got to my car, which is just not far away, all the screaming had stopped, and the only thing you could hear was the hueco sound of the riot sticks hitting the guy. And I just turned my stomach and I just said, I can't leave. So I turned around, went back, took photographs, and I ended up with my skull fractured and in the hospital, charged with it was 8 charges: assault with a deadly weapon against 4 officers and assault and battery on 4 officers. So it was a total of 8 charges. It took 9 months to beat those charges, and then another 7 years. So for a total of 7.5 years, the lawsuit trial. And the lawsuit trial was beyond dramatic. You were talking about how we were raised in East LA. Well, in the trial, we used Chicha's video, Born in East LA, because the police presented all the cruising and all the cruisers as like violent hoodlums, you know, everyone carrying a machine gun, you know, machetes and on and on. And we used that video to tell the jury, essentially, that that's not how we are. You know, of course there's violence here and there, but I mean, they make it seem like we were all hardened criminals and on and on. And it was beyond amazing. But the amazing part about that trial was that the attorney that took my case for 7 years, the lawsuit attorney, he called 2 days before my trial and called my family, and they said, "Hey, tell your," talking to my brother, he goes, "Tell your brother that he's on trial in 2 days. Good luck, and to get himself a new attorney after 7 years." So to make a long story short, I went back to my original attorney. He flipped out, but again, to make it short, he took the case, and in 36 days, it was like nonstop, and we did win. Yeah, the settlement was like, because we had gotten more money, but they can appeal and keep appealing, right? So we settled for a smaller amount, but the trial was won, you know. Anyway, so all those years, I mean, you could imagine 7.5 years. I think in the first year, I got arrested over 60 times, and all of it was based on death threats, you know, always. I was always getting pulled over, et cetera, et cetera. So for me to fight against this stuff is not by choice, you know, because that's what I lived, and I could not hide or get away from it. We talk about, I don't even know if we used the word racial profiling in those days, but that's exactly what it was. Maybe we called it something else, because in my arrest report, it said that I was the leader of a gang of 10 to 15 Mexicans, you know? So it's like, what do you want to call that, you know? Racial profiling. Anyway, so the point is, we were living that in the 70s, but, you know, not by coincidence, I actually was writing an article at that very moment, and they got published later, precisely about how the 70s were the same as the 40s, the Sleepy Lagoon, when they hauled in like 400 or 500 people just because they were Mexican, you know? Anyway, so part of all this is just to say that, like, all of that dragged me into a world that I really wasn't a part of. You know, I grew up, literally, my address was on Whittier Boulevard in East LA. And so it was just there, and it was around me. I had a couple of brothers that were into that, you know, the cruising and all that. I think I only went cruising once, you know, before I was 18. I think it was about 16 or 15, I think. But so that wasn't really what I did. That was more as a journalist, you know, that's how I kind of got in there. And like I said, not because I wanted to, but ever since then, I've documented police brutality, you know, over and over. I went in both directions, like from then to now, but I also wanted to know, when did it start? And I don't have any hesitation in saying that on this continent, it goes back to 1492. because you mentioned it a second ago, dehumanization. When Europeans got here, they didn't think we were human. And to this day, and I can show you statistics that show that impunity, it's almost like probably about 99.99%. Now, today is May 5th, and today there's two things related to that date. You know, most of us know Cinco de Mayo, of course, right? That anti-imperialist victory against the French in Mexico, Puebla, but also murdered and missing indigenous women. I think this is the 5th year that they do a national action on this topic. I used to think that was a separate topic, right? Law enforcement violence or National Guard or the military or whatever, you know, the government, state violence. And then murdered and missing indigenous women. I thought, well, that's a different topic because it's not the state, it's not the police. Until all this study, it kicked in one day that like the impunity is almost the same about murdered and missing indigenous women and African-American women and migrant women. The reason that the numbers are almost the same is because there are no independent investigations, which results in no prosecution, no trials, nobody goes to prison. So they are very much linked. And I think, like I said, if people don't know, today is a day of action for Native peoples across the country, Canada too, I think. But in any case, so that's kind of a nice linkage. You know, I wanted to introduce Tania because she's related to my book, Yolki. I met her about 3 years ago or so, and my book, Yolki, came out in 2019. And I had already lived, you could imagine, right? 79, this is for 2019, like 40 years. And it's not a pleasant topic, but again, it's not a choice. It's a responsibility. So I just thought to myself, well, I guess here I go again. My publisher wanted me to write this book, so I wrote it. And I said, well, I guess for the next couple of years, I'm going to be presenting on this topic again. And again, not pleasant, right? So one time I met Tania and she invited me to a guided yoga, or at least that's what I heard. And it was at a Pueblo community center and about 100 people were there. And instead of guided yoga, it was guided meditation. And I so relaxed from that, her guided meditation, that I told her, I go, hey, I got a book coming out. And I go, it's on violence. And I go, I always tense up. It's extremely difficult and I don't like it. But if you do what you just did, I said, I think it'll be awesome, you know? And she ended up doing that, followed up. And the first time that we presented, we presented the book, Tania did do that guided meditation. And ever since then, we've gone many places and it does have that effect. You know, I don't feel, I mean, if I have to go out there, it's awesome to have someone like her present, whether it's in person or in this case, like Zoom. So anyway, maybe Tania can talk a little bit about her relationship to Yolki because she's taking it even further. And I should mention the name of my book is called Yolki, A Warrior Summons from the Spirit World. And the brief explanation of Yolki, I got that when I was finishing up my Maiz book. And it talked about Yolki being a warrior summoned from the spirit world. And when I saw that in a codex, I said, that's the name of my next book. And so that's how I got that name. And basically what it is are warriors that live in the spirit world and they're summons to this world. When I was almost killed, that's what happened, so to speak, because I did go unconscious. And in my mind, after all these years, I figured out, that's what happened to me. I died and I summons myself back. I kind of skipped a little bit there, but that's the idea. So when I've heard Tania present in public, she has an even better explanation. So maybe she'll explain that right now, or at least explain her work in relationship to this. So Tania?
Yes, thank you so much, Roberto, for those beautiful words. And thank you for inviting me to the space. Yes, the Yolki book literally was everything that explained, that tragic night, all that history behind it. But I realized that just as much as it had violence, it had a lot of healing through just the word Yolki. And because I was more like into the Middle Eastern knowledge and medicine, with the yoga, I had just graduated from yoga teacher training. And I realized that it was kind of the same idea and same concept, the warrior within you. We had like a warrior pose. And I think that was a meditation about, which was finding your inner warrior. And then he's like, my book is exactly about what you just mentioned. And I was like, what is it about? And then Yolki, and I was like, oh my God, what's Yolki? And then he's like, now it's a word in now what, basically with what you just explained within finding that inner warrior within, that fire, that light to help you battle and fight in this world, in this reality. And I just felt, I don't know, I just felt this like passion to share that his story is, and what he created out of all of that, all those years of violence, of the trials, of everything. It was just really exciting for me to be part of such important work in his life. So that's my little passion. I transfer all of that into the healing, the yoga, the meditation, and history.
And I think Tanya, you're going to show us that in a bit, right? Some of that healing that you do, some of that meditation. Good. Alvaro, I don't know if you want us to go with a question.
Yeah, definitely. I want, because we talked a little bit about you, and maybe Tanya can talk a little bit about herself, her practice, and like who she is. That way, the audience and knows a little bit more. And then go ahead and take it to. I think it'll be good that you kind of teach us your ways, so that especially after hearing Roberto's tragic story, that I didn't want that to be triggered, so maybe we
need to... You know what's funny? After I think after a year of going on, I call them like my yoga rockstar tours with him. But after a year, after a year, he was like, hey, can you translate this book in Spanish? And I was like, yes, of course. And I realized all that shaking, all that trauma, I think it took me a year to translate it. He's like, what's taking so long? What's taking so long? Because the Maiz book, I translated in like 2 months because it was beautiful history and knowledge. But that one, I was like, to be honest, I'm very emotionally like unbalanced because of it. I was crying. Hay testimonios demasiado poderosos that you're like, wow, it's a lot of fuel and in Spanish, it just resonated more, I think. And I was like, this is really important, heavy story, heavy moral, and a beautiful like spiritual kind of cleansing of that spiritual genocide that we took place. So thank you so much for letting me share that.
Alvaro, that we both, well, I live in Mexico nowadays, but Tanya lives in Tucson. And when I was here, for 15 years as a professor at the University of Arizona, we had that battle ethnic studies, and it was intense. And most of the youngsters that fought were in middle school and high school. And then, of course, we had our college students. But it's an untold story. And one of the things that we learned from that is the concept of creation resistance, or some might call it resistance creation, because the resistance part is people, you can use another word like reaction. That is, somebody would do something like, say, the Republican Party or the governor or the sheriff or the state superintendent, and we would react. I think they were reacting to us to begin with because we created ethnic studies, And so what happened is, with all these years, I think it was about 11 years of battle, that at a certain point, we were like, how come we don't do anything on our own? The governor signs something or shows up to Tucson and we're out there protesting. I said, when are we going to do something independent of them, And that's where the idea of creation came in, And I think that's where a lot of what Tanya does is in the realm of creation. And I think a lot of us need that because, I think they call it battle fatigue. People of color, Native peoples, we've all been fighting forever, always. But it's a lot of it. We don't call it reaction, but that's what we're doing, a lot of it. So when you get to the point of creation, it's like that's you can call it the flowering of a human being. That is, we're balanced. We have that duality of creation and resistance. It'd be awesome to just do creation, except that we live in Arizona. And in Arizona, you can't ignore Sheriff Arpaio, Governor Brewer, and on and on and on. This was the ex-president's favorite state, Arizona. I don't even mention the guy's name.
Yeah, big racistas.
Yeah, because he used to hang out with Brewer and Arpaio and Horn and all those people. But anyway, so the important thing is, I think when Tania does that in a little while, you'll see that end of it, and not all of us will be there, in the yoga type stuff. Other people maybe were more intellectual, or maybe, we like mariachi music, or in other words, something different.
Tequila.
But I think exactly today. Yeah, no, but I think through that expression, people can see, it's the equivalent of how do you calm down, because people talk about that battle fatigue, like a racial battle fatigue, always having to be on. Well, how do you do that? With some people, it's meditative music, right? With other people, it's whatever, jazz. Well, with Tania, what she's been doing, I think, is really exciting. And I've seen it and I've heard it, but people can't wait to have more of it. Technically, we're both creating this. In other words, it's not something from a long time ago. In like the equivalent of indigenous yoga, it's like that's what she's working on, and it has to do with those Mesoamerican feminine energies. I don't know if she might want to talk about that now, or do we start with the Maiz book? Or Tania, what do you think?
You can talk a little bit about the Maiz book, because because I would.
Okay.
Then
Sure.
I think that's a good transition. It's also we were talking about this earlier, about the balance. Because these are heavy topics, and honestly, I even feel bad just even bringing up what happened to you, because I know that it's in the book and you write about it, but it's just like when you retell it, it's just a whole different story.
But that's fine, because I'm telling you, it's like what I was saying, creation resistance. You can't ignore it. That's why I meant, like, we could create and not resist, but then we're no longer we don't have that duality, and that's part of life. And that's the people that I deal with. People that have lost a brother. You yourself know that life. That is, we've lost half of our neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. And so to think that, oh, well, we can shut it out, we can't shut it out. Right. And that's part of that responsibility that I mentioned. So in other words, if people see me crack or hesitate or pause, that's part of life, and that's something that's already accepted. The good thing is to have someone like Tania to do that balance, is awesome. So I think she wanted to say something. Tania?
Yes, there's actually a word that that I learned from you when you mention a lot, and it's a Mayan term of Yacuna. In Yacuna, it's like amar is doler es amar. I know pain and I cure it with love. Basically, it's like we need that pain and then transform that into love, healing, creating. Yeah, I love.
No, it's like that's like what you said, Alvaro. Yeah. In other words, they coexist. Right. Amor y dolor, and in this case, creation resistance. It's part of life. So yeah, and like I said, the survivors that I know, it's like most of us would not want to do this stuff, but it's not an option. It's like we have that responsibility. And anyway, so
but that's what you need other people to help.
Absolutely.
To help articulate that, so you don't have to carry that burden yourself. Because last week we had Homeboy Industries a discussion, and we had Hector Verdugo, someone that I grew up with, one of my homeboys, and my brother, Ismael Huerta. And actually, they were more homeboys because I'm older than them. Because in the neighborhood, people hang out by age or by grade. In terms of like your friends. And he was talking about like the trauma that he experienced at home, and just listening to the story, you just cry, because he's talking about his dad overdosing heroin, mom's boyfriend like beating them up, and them being taken into protective custody and like in these homes, and getting abused by them too, like the whole state. Yeah. And then I'm reading Father Boyle's book also on Homeboy Industries. it talks a lot about that trauma in the family, and I just want to remind everyone. I said, well, that does happen, but also the more than anything, the trauma is by the state, in terms of the way, like poverty is a form of violence by the state. That's what Pablo Freire once said. And even our kids, when they go to school, when they're told that they're not good enough, or they can't go to college because college is not for everybody, they only say that in our communities. They don't say that in white communities. That's a form of state too, state violence, right? So both of you are 100%. I mean, I think that's why we should take this on the road.
Yeah. Well, no, and it is awesome because, like, as you know, like we have an association of professors nationwide, right? And I think you're one of the few, that literally grew up on the East Side and continue to do that battle. Others go off and do other things, etc., or who knows where they are. But I know you've been consistent in that work. Mm-hmm. We were going to go into the Maiz book, but I forget to mention, I need to spend about 5 minutes, if that much. No,
do what you got to. Yeah. No, whatever you feel.
Yeah, on the current situation, because what I mentioned, that's something that I lived, and it was 7.5 years intense, but the rest was like secondary, but it was still there. But the current, that is, when George Floyd was killed, Brown, when Brown was killed in Ferguson, that began a new chapter in American
Michael
history.
Brown, no?
Michael Brown, yeah. And so I began to monitor more intensely. I had always monitored, but this time it became more intense. And a few media companies began to do the same. The Washington Post, especially. The LA Times has a section on the topic. And then there was the Guardian. They were doing the best work out of England. They had they had a thing here in the US. Anyway, so there was about 5 databases, killedbypolice.net as another example. They began to do this work. And after about 6 months, I had heard, I don't know how many stories on the topic. And I thought there was something wrong with it because, this is something that I had already lived. So that was like by then, it must have been about 35 years of my life on that topic. But I began to hear the topic, and it, like the rest of society, it was black and white discussion. And so I know people that in our communities, they get real mad about that. But the problem with that is that they don't express themselves in the best way. So they make it like an anti-black thing, like, hey, what about us? That type of discussion. And to me, it's like, no, we don't need that.
No, yeah.
We need to step forward, and as you mentioned at the beginning, Native peoples, black and brown peoples, we live the same reality. The world doesn't know about it. So that's our job, to make sure that the whole world knows about it. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, the Asian community, because of the ex-president, they got the highest rates of, what do they call that? Vigilante violence against them right now, and on and on. So anyway, so what happened is I started monitoring and all that. And, a lot of us have debated what people call us, right? So some people will call us Latins and Hispanics. They got all these names for us, Ibero-American, Spanish, all those names. And people think that, oh, it's just the name. I said, but you know what? In the research that I did, it does matter what they call you, because there's a preconception. This would take probably several hours to explain, so I'm going to just cut to the chase. That is, we have shown and proven that these 3 groups do have the same kinds of violence. Officially, Native peoples have the highest rates of violence against them. But I wouldn't even emphasize that, so to speak. In other words, Native, black, and brown have lived that same reality since 1492. That is, treated as not human or less than human. The statistics, if you go through them, and I'll give the example of the Washington Post. They have 5 categories: white, black, Hispanic, other, and unidentified. Anyway, I had no idea that we were put into every one of the categories, but primarily into the white category and the unidentified category. I don't know how I got into that page one time, but I looked into the unidentified category, and there was Garcia, Lopez, Sanchez, Gomez, I was like, wait a minute, what are these doing in the unidentified category? And then I went into the white category, same thing, same names. I go, something's wrong here. So that was about 3-4 years ago. So I started doing that, monitoring those other categories. And every single year, I would say that if you look at the statistics from anyone, there's usually going to be about a 1/3 undercount at least. 2020 was the worst, but then 2021 was, I would say, the word weird as opposed to worse. And I say weird because we did a national study, the Raza Killings Database report. And so we found those numbers, That's why I can say that it is those groups that are living the same reality. But what I found in 2021, in other words, there should have been an improvement in terms of the gathering because of the work that we did. It got covered by the Washington Post, by CNN, and on and on. All of a sudden, in the year 2021, the biggest racial category, the biggest number of people killed were in the unidentified category. Now, if you're a statistician, your lowest number of anything should be unidentified, because if it's high, that means you didn't do your work or you didn't do it right. It should be like 1-2% maybe, that we don't know. Instead, the 2021, white, Black, Hispanic, other unidentified is bigger than all the other 4 categories combined. Go figure. Now, of course, that didn't stop us. We went and looked at, again, every single category, and you have in the unidentified category, of course, that's where all the Gomez's and the Sanchez are at. Now it's just a mess. We are doing the work that the government should be doing, but there's 2 things that I've mentioned: the media and the government. It's the accounting. So what's the number one problem? It's not that. The number one problem is that we're getting killed. We're getting brutalized. It's a system of control. That's the number one problem. The accounting and the media, that's also should be taken care of. So that's why those discussions about like who's getting killed more, that shouldn't even be there. The question should be, why are you killing us? And so it's a long story, but the point being is that's why, like someone like myself who lived that trauma years ago, and like you mentioned, it shouldn't be up to me. It should be the government. But in terms of nonprofit organizations and universities, etc., there should be a nationwide effort to do that, because you're right. I know lots of survivors, and believe me, you don't want survivors to go up there and break down every single time. And I've seen that over and over, and in public, they're brave. But I'll tell you afterwards, it's like, who enjoys breaking down? It's the breaking down of the spirit. It's not healthy. So that's why I personally think, and I've told this to people for years, the National Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies should be a human rights organization as opposed to a conference, And that's how I feel, because you're right. It shouldn't be up to volunteers to tell us what's going on. The FBI, that's their official charge, and they're the last people you want to go to for those numbers. They do the worst job. There's tens of thousands of 18,000 law enforcement agencies, and only a handful of them cooperate. It's voluntary. So the last thing you're going to do is get accuracy from the FBI.
They'll be self-reporting. They don't want that.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, but as we go into the Maiz thing, I just wanted to be clear about that it is huge. I personally think that there's 2 things that should be done, because I support all the reform efforts. I don't think that's the solution, but I support them all. I think that when you see a cop, and if it's proven that he's guilty, that the cop should get minimum 30 years, 40, 50 years in prison, or even life. Until you see that, there's no disincentive for a law enforcement officer anywhere. Because if it's, say, 3 months in jail, or fine him $1 for killing a Mexican, as happened in Houston, nobody's ever going to be discouraged. It has to be 30, 40, 50 years to life. I don't believe in the death penalty for anyone. So I wouldn't advocate that. But I do think 30, 40, 50 years should be what happens. Separate from that, I think that we should be going to the UN, the International Criminal Court, because we've already gone to the UN, I don't know how many times, and the UN has already declared that the US system of justice is racist. I'm like, no shit. I mean, who doesn't know that? Everybody knows that. We have to go to the criminal court. Those are the ones that hunt down Nazis 75 years after the fact, Anyway, so we
Yeah,
talked about heavy trauma, so let's get down to let's slow down a little bit.
there's a Nazi in Florida they have to look for. Yeah, let's go to some meditation and
Yeah,
because it's already a little. I'm getting depressed myself right now.
yeah. Tanya, so you want me to give it a quick intro and then you do it?
For the maize,
Yeah.
if you want, or I can, yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'll be super brief thing. So the whole point of maize is that a lot of us were looking for where we come from, who we are, et cetera, et cetera. In the field of Chicana and Chicano studies and Raza studies, they would say that Raza or Chicanos, that we were created in 1848. And then about 10 years later, it was like, no, it's actually 1519, the mixture, the mestizaje, et cetera. Well, I wasn't part of that debate. As a writer, I used to go to conferences, go everywhere and meet elders everywhere. And it's a long story about a map that we had found and on and on. But in the end, I remember quite a few elders, but one of them specifically told me, hey, are you looking for where the Aztecs came from or where you came from? And I told him, I said, no, I never thought about that, but I think I'm looking for where I came from. And he says, that's what I thought. I go, if that's what you're looking for, forget the maps. You want to know who you are, follow the corn, follow the maize. And so I think for me, that work that I did, along with the assistance of a number of elders, including my own parents, I think we found something that roots us, because a lot of us were kind of like that we're not from here, we're not from there, we're not sure who we are, and on and on. I think that maize roots us here, at least 7,000 years. We all have a little bit of everything. I personally, I have photographs of my grandfather. If you see him, he looks Afro-Indigenous. I obviously know that there's a little bit of European here and there. Everybody has a little bit mixture somewhere, So the point is, but that doesn't preclude us from being native or being indigenous. So we can be both. And so for me, that my work has introduced that idea that we're not a creation of a war or an invasion, but we pre-exist all that thousands and thousands of years. And anyway, so through all that, Tanya and I have been presenting for a while. And I remember one time Tanya speaking about the women, the feminine energies that like from the Popol Vuh or the Codex Chimalpopoco, all the different pre-Columbian sources. And I remember one time this one guy says, like, hey, well, we don't need that. Our cultures we do duality. We don't do that. And Tanya responds, well, that may be so, but how come it's all men, all the male energies? And so where are the female or the feminine energies? And so she began to do that, and now she's doing indigenous yoga. Anyway, so I think she can explain it herself, and you can probably do that meditation too if you wish, and talk about that book that you're working on for the future.
For sure. Thank you so much. When I came across the Maiz book, I realized how he said he has a creation story of Quetzalcoatl and Quelatzli. And then I was like, why is that not in the Nahuiolin? And then I just started realizing like the whole Nahuiolin was just based on the sun, the guidance, the will. And I was like, but where's Coyoshalki? Where's this? Where's that? And then I realized that all these creation stories show a moral and a value that's really important for the feminine aspect of it. And then for me and the maize, it just opened up the whole duality aspect of everything, which is kind of weird. So anyway, I'm just gonna go ahead and start with my meditation because that's how I will relate more a little bit. So feel free to simply listen or join in. Hands palm center. We're gonna inhale fully. Exhale completely. Next exhale, join me with an Om, A-U-M. Sets a vibrational frequency representing the beginning, the middle, and the end. Inhale fully. Om. And I would love to welcome everybody into this healing space, this space of light, this space of wisdom. We're gonna plant all feet in the ground. Feel the earth's vibration. Feel those roots. Plant deeply. Put your hands face down in your thighs. Activate your ankles. Activate your knees. Your footprints in life. Your mission in this life. And then we're gonna place our hands right under our belly button. We're gonna inhale fully. Exhale completely. Remember that with each exhale you take, you elevate your mind, you elevate your spirit, and you ground. Feel so grounded. You start feeling those roots. Out, roll shoulders back, and head skull up. Inhale fully. Exhale completely. We're gonna put our right hand in our heart and keep the left one in your belly. Feel the warmth. It's here that I like to grab on to the energy of Chicomecoat. It's the feminine aspect of maize. That heat, that fire, that warmth we all have within us. Not just the hard work, the resilience, the land. Feel this warmth. Feel this heat. And transform it into a beautiful flower. We're gonna put our hands here, inhale up. And then you pick your branch, hands together, hands apart, hands open wide. Be that beautiful flower. There's a quote in the Yolki book that says that they thought they could bury us, but they did not know we were seeds. We're gonna inhale fully. Exhale completely. Be ready to blossom into a beautiful flower that we all have. The more rooted we are, the more higher we fly. Namaste. I can't hear you. Okay.
Well, I was gonna tell Alvaro that it's Tania's birthday today. So it's a kind of a special thing too for her, you know. But I just wanted to mention that.
We need everyone. Feliz cumpleaños in the chat.
Thank you.
Feliz cumpleaños. That means happy birthday, people. For those of you who are not bilingual.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to see everybody, especially if you want to pass the class, because people are taking the grade.
Yeah, so I think if you want to ask any kind of a question, first with you, Alvaro, I know I didn't even talk about my second trial. That is, I can be super brief if you want, just to let people, because I brought in Cheech, right? I mentioned Cheech.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that super brief. That is, when I did my second trial, remember 2 days before the trial, my attorney dropped the case, right? So I called up my original attorney. And so we had this incredible trial. We had to find our witnesses and on and on. And during the trial, it was so intense. The courtroom was packed. I don't even know if you were there, because I remember, I think it was your generation of machistas.
Yeah. Adrian went.
Yeah, so I remember that the courtroom was half cops and half machistas, you know? And it was incredibly tense. And my attorney says, okay, we have the last jurors coming up. Do you have a question for her? Because it was a woman, right? And I said, yeah, I got a question for her. And he said, what? I said, ask her if she's seen Cheech's video, Born in East LA. And my attorney looked at me like, what? I said, Antonio, look, turn around. And I'm serious, everybody's at the edge of their seats, like, you know, because the cops were talking about violence, machine guns, and, you know, machetes and everything, all the super violence. And I said, that's what they think of East LA. They think that's how we live. And then he was like, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah. So if you remember the Colombo thing, the way he used to do his thing, like, so Antonio was ready to sit down and he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I got one last thing. And then he asked the jurors, he goes, do you, have you seen Cheech's video, Born in East LA? And I'm not making this up, every single person in the jury, no, in the entire courtroom could not stop laughing. I think it was like about a 2-minute laughing, including the cops and the judge and the jury. And so it worked because it was the same thing what Tania does, you know, that is, it brought that tension down. And then Antonio, in my opinion, my attorney, Antonio Rodríguez, I think he gave the speech of his life because he talked about that, you know, about how they see us as animalistic, you know, how we've been criminalized and on and on and on. I said, but if you watch that video, that's who we are, you know? And anyway, so that I think that was just the one thing. And part of the reason, remember I told you, like, you know, to me, it doesn't matter. If I was like a perfect human being, maybe my voice would never crack, or I would never, you know, but we are human beings. And the point being is that, like, when that happened to me years ago, everybody that I knew on the East Side had an experience or two on the topic. And I remember the veteranos, they would say, like, what the hell are you doing going to court, you know? I said, we don't do it that way. We take care of it in a different way, you know?
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, well, if everybody's living that, it's got to stop, you know? And I go, no, I'm not going to allow myself to be, well, actually, they were trying to put me in prison like for what, 20 years at least, you know, trying to kill 4 cops. So for me, that's where it comes from, what I told you, that sense of responsibility, that if it happens to everybody, then we have to do something, you know? But anyway, I just wanted to finish with that about that. And just say thank you to Tania again and again, happy birthday. And I just figured you may have a question, or your students might have, or whoever's tuning in may have questions, and we'll be more than happy. And I know Tania wanted to do some yoga poses she's taken from this work. So we can do that too in a little bit.
Yeah, that'll be great. And I think we lost her, so if maybe you can text her if she comes back.
Okay.
Then she could probably even share her information if she has these practices where people can join her.
Right.
There is one question, and while you're doing that, I'll address it.
Sure.
There's one question about what was happening with the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In terms of, I'm assuming this has to do with abortion and how they're about to outlaw abortion. And really, this is a violation of human rights where women are being attacked. I remember there was one event during the Orange Man's reign where there was an event on abortion rights organized by Republicans, and every single panelist was a white male, like an older white guy. Talking about abortion. So this attack on women is something that has been planned since
50 years.
Yeah, since 1972 and 73, around there. Yeah. And it's something that it just needs to wake people up, because a lot of people even sat out the Trump when Hillary lost. They're like, wow, you know, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, you know, in these situations. I mean, I don't really believe in electoral politics, but when you're about to vote in somebody whose proudest moment is to grab women by their private parts into office, I mean, this is what you get. You know, this is what you get in terms of electing these right-wing, you know, conservative judges. Now, I criticize Republicans and Democrats equally.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about the Supreme Court as a sacred institution. It's always been. No, it's not. It's never been sacred. The Supreme Court was okay with slavery. You know, it was okay with Jim Crow. You know, it was okay with
Genocide.
Genocide and the killing of natives and relocation of natives and the taking of Mexico, half the land,
Theft.
and all that. So I think we need to be vigilant about this and then unite as we go.
Yeah. So just a quick note,
We
Alvaro.
have to get switched again. Okay, let me try
Yeah,
to bring her back.
back in.
Okay,
Well,
go ahead.
I'll speak while you're getting her back in. I'll speak brief and then she can maybe address it too. But yeah, I would say that I think what Alvaro, what Professor Huerta saying, I mean, it's almost like I have to echo that. That is, I'm one person that does not believe in the U.S. judicial system because of what I've talked about. The murdered and missing indigenous, African-American and migrant women, the police violence, it's like 99.999% impunity. How are you gonna believe in a system like that? You know, I won, but it's like, I don't think I won because the system was fair. You know, I think I won for different reasons. But the point being is that where is the evidence? So we have the evidence. So if you're talking about women or you're talking about this other topic of violence, it's all violence against the spirit. And I know if Tanya's back on, she can speak to that idea about violence against the spirit, because that's exactly what it is. You were talking about poverty as violence. Absolutely. You know, our spirit is dehumanized to the point where we're not seen as fully human. So in this particular case, women are not seen as fully human, deserving of full human rights, you know? And I think some people are very happy about that. In other words, we live in a system of apartheid. What else could you call it? And Tanya, I don't know if you are back on. If you want to say something.
I am. I was listening to everything and then I couldn't.
Okay.
And you were talking about spiritual genocide?
Trump tried to deport you. I think we saw how to bring you back.
Well, what somebody brought up the question of Roe versus Wade, how they're going to outlaw abortion, that women won't be able to choose for themselves what they want or don't want. And anyway, so we were both addressing it, but I didn't know if you wanted to say a thing or two about that topic. I don't know if you have opinions on the topic.
Yes, very much indeed. I feel like we've been silenced for way too long. And personally, I relate to Coyoshalki's energy here because she's a dismembered kind of queen and dismembered goddess, basically, energy. And once you remember that truth, you remember your roots, you remember your medicine, you remember your wisdom, and you have a voice all of a sudden. You have power, you have will, you have guidance, but with a more compassionate flow. You're not just like grabbing onto the energy of a more dominant Huitzilopochtli, but also like flowing with that compassionate flow of humbleness, respect. And I love that we can all have a voice, but we can be very humble and respectful of that voice and create a change for more voices to be awoken, kind of like awake that fire within, to keep lighting up other fires within, which is beautiful because that's our medicine, that's our culture, our ancestors, it's our healing. It's a kind of way to break that spiritual genocide that we've been kind of what's it called? Been kind of like emotionally just piling up and piling up and piling up. And it's time to create that space to let go. It's time to transform all the sickness, all the hate, all the pain, transform it into medicine, into light, compassion, and respect. Because this world needs a lot more of that. That's kind of my take.
I saw. I saw, I think Sylvia wrote something and it flashed, but I didn't get to read the whole thing. But I think you actually answered what she asked, which is how do you reconnect with your indigenous roots? And I think that's where you were going with all this right now. I will add something very brief. If you have that as part of your DNA, you're part of your family, etc., but are disconnected, well, the ideal is to go that route. That is, go look, search out your own family. That's where it begins. Because nowadays people are taking the faster route of DNA test. You know, Ancestry 23, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's kind of like almost like cheating, you know. I think you should go direct.
I don't even believe that stuff. I think,
yeah, no,
I think
because
it's like a fortune cookie. They just tell you what.
Yeah, it's like, what does it mean to have 12% of something versus?
I don't even
10%?
believe it. They're just making it up. Somebody's.
Yeah, it's a new narrative of like, oh well, I'm 13% this and I'm 17% that and 24. Like, what the hell does that mean? You know,
Yeah.
it's like I remember what we were taught by elders. You know, it's like, well, what part of you say you're half? Which half is, you know, this part, and what half is? What's the other half? In this case, we're going to percentages. It's ridiculous. We're full human beings, and we all have, you know, all human beings are mixed. Every single one of us, you know. People that say not, that means they don't really understand, you know, and the concept of race, of course, is invented. But the point is, all of us literally, I mean, we all are part of each other. You know, that's where I wanted to actually go with also in the work that we're doing. In California, they banned the teaching of, Tania mentioned the Nahui Olin. In Lakesh was banned. You know, that's a Maya concept. The other one is a Aztec Mexica concept. And then Ashe, which is an African and Yoruba concept. You know, they're actually banning ideas, banning narratives. I always tell people, I said, look, you know, if we were in Africa or Asia or China, etc., you know, when you're there, you're going to learn the history of that continent. You're going to learn that history. When we're here in the Americas, what is wrong with learning the philosophical foundations of this continent, you know? And here, I mean, obviously, they always talk about the three roots, right? The African, the European, and of course, the native, you know? But as we know, thousands of years before, you know, there was something here. And what do we know about it? Most of us know nothing, you know? However, some of us do know something. And we should be able to teach that without people saying, oh, well, you know, they're teaching the devil's religion. That's actually what they're saying. They don't want in Lakesh, which is the universal golden rule. They don't want it taught because they say it's part of the Aztec religion. Now, number one, the difference between a Maya and an Aztec is two different peoples. And then the worst part is, it's like the assumption is like, oh, the Aztecs were demonic. You know, they were devil worshippers and on and on. And as people that are raised in this culture, the Western culture, people actually believe it. You know, and they don't teach that in that same era, you know, they had the Inquisition, and prior to that, they had the Crusades. You know, they were able to kill millions, hang people, burn people at the stake, women at the stake. You know, I always tell Tania, the knowledge that she has, that indigenous knowledge, whether it's from the East or the West, you know, or from here, she would have been, you know, burned at the stake, you know, because that's where they were, you know, their minds were in the dark age, what they call the dark ages, the superstitious era, you know. So right now, that's the battle that we're having, that these topics that we're talking about are banned. We're not supposed to teach that. That's why we had the battle in Arizona. You know, even little 3-year-olds knew that, they knew that that's part of who we are, the indigenous thousands of years, where the state was trying to tell us, you can't teach anything prior to 1492. You know, tan zafados, you know, that is who we are. Like I said, we're a little bit of everything, but absolutely, that's part of who we are, the pre-1492, thousands of years, the maiz culture.
Gracias for that. Someone asked a question, maybe Tania, you can address this. Like if someone wants to connect with their motherland or their parents' motherland, but they don't have the means to go back, you know, what can they do, or what's some of the ways that they can reconnect?
That's a beautiful question, because I feel that when I started connecting with my roots and kind of finding my own truth, this was before I had met Roberto. I knew my grandma was Yaqui, and I took a Yaqui history class. And that Yaqui history class literally changed my life. I was like, well, my God, I'm not crazy. There's mystical, there's cosmology, but at the same time, it was very religion based. And I knew there was a little bit more. I knew there was something like more deeper. And also, like, just follow your intuition, follow your guidance. There's a very powerful quote that I grabbed on with our events. And it said, turn off the mind to let the soul flow through the body, which was really cute because then you kind of listen to your heart. And I always say your heart is your number one source because it's there where you get your messages from your ancestors. It's there where you get that guidance from all these energies, feminine, masculine. And after that changed my life. And then I started more with Nahuatl, with Maya. And then I just kept going because that wisdom and that knowledge was life-changing for me more than anything. And I actually went back to my roots to connect a little bit more and a little bit deeper. And I've been going for 3 years now. So it's really beautiful to respect all religions because at the end of the day, it's literally the same philosophy. The same philosophy to connect with our elements, Mother Nature, to create, to be imbalanced. So it was really cool. So follow that intuition, start little by little.
You know, I can add something to that because you were saying, what if you cannot connect with your roots, right? Or you can't go back, something like that, right?
Right.
Well,
Let's say your motherland you can't visit because you don't have the money to travel.
Right. You know, but I remember I told somebody that, you know, like, hey, I can't afford to go to Mexico. He goes, why not? I said, well, doesn't it cost a lot of money? I go, no, it takes about $10. Just jump on a bus and you're there. And I didn't realize at the time what that meant. You literally can go. It's that cheap. Now, if you can't stay at a 5-star hotel, that's a different story. But no, I wanted to mention one thing real quick because anybody can do this. You know, I live in Teotihuacan right now, the pyramids, the ones by Mexico City. We're going to start a cultural embassy in August 27th and September 3rd. That's the kickoff. Anyway, I think if somebody goes there, it will change your life. When I was 22, the day after I graduated from UCLA, I went to Teotihuacan. And I remember, you know, being born in Mexico, you know, and coming to the US and not knowing but one word in English, which was the word toilet. My dad taught me that. I went to Teotihuacan, that is raised in LA, and hearing always the word wetback or mojado, you know, that was me, you know, that was our family. It was vicious, right? And it was from both white people, gringos, and Mexican Americans.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was vicious. And so all this time, you kind of absorb it. People tell, oh, Mexicans are dirty, Mexicans are thieves and banditos and on and on. So there's nothing positive about Mexican people, right? So I graduated from UCLA, I go there, and when I climbed that Pyramid of the Sun, in my mind, I was like, my God, all these people lied. You can't create a city like this. I mean, it's based on astronomy, mathematics, architecture, engineering, and on and on and on. You can't do that if you're stupid, you know? So in my mind right away, I was like, God, what a crime that they stole that from us. They gave us all this crap, you know, where we're just as good as anybody. We're not better, we're not worse, we're the same, you know? But in their minds, somehow we were less than, you know, we were not as good as. And so I think to me, that's where it can start. If you literally don't know who to go, you know, like, oh, I don't know where my tío or my tía live, or I don't know, et cetera, et cetera. Even that is, I think, a good start because that'll take you somewhere. It's very spiritual. And, you know, again, I can't tell you, you don't need a guide. Just go there and something will happen to your spirit. And I would say that should happen to anybody because, you know, they've done that to the rest of the world. Europe did that to everybody, you know, in Africa, that in Asia and on and on. India, you know, they made us less than human, but we were never less than human. Anyway, so I think that
Roberto always says like our elders are our number one creators, like our stories, our everything. I ask your mom, ask your dad, ask your tia, and you will start finding and finding and finding. It's beautiful.
Yes, definitely. And Roberto, you know, I don't want to put too much age on you, but you're an elder to us, so we really respect all your wisdom and everything you've done in life and you sacrifice and always giving back. So really appreciate that. If I haven't told you before, I think it's important that that we all give that respect to people who, who kind of paved the way for the rest of us. Like I said, when Roberto went to UCLA, there was only like 2 Mexicans in college. One was a janitor, so there was Roberto and another guy that he was like the son of an ambassador.
No, there was three because Juan Gomez was going there.
Yeah. Our great leader, speaking of elders, we both are, Roberto and I are both students of the late Dr. Juan Gomez Quiñones, one of the greatest intellectuals of all time. Too often with Mexican Americans or Chicanas, we try to always like, well, he's like a copy of Howard Zinn or Noam Chomsky. And I always say, no, Juan Gomez Quiñones was somebody that he was like Plato and Socrates, like Franz Fanon, like a giant. But because of the media, because of the racism, the anti-Mexicanism, he wrote a brilliant essay on anti-Mexicanism, and something that I didn't even know existed until I read that article. And I've been doing that all my life in terms of fighting against it. But it's those type of elders that that we need to praise. And unfortunately, I know not everybody in the panel or the audience are Mexican origin, but so I just speak for myself, in terms of being Mexican, is that too often, we're taught to be humble, and that humility goes against us. Right? So we're taught not to brag about ourselves so when we have someone like a great intellectuals or Gloria Anduza, those to me, Anduza, okay, somewhere. Saldúa, yeah, I guess it's my accent. East LA accent. It's hard for me to pronounce their names. But we need to elevate them at the level of these other great thinkers, in terms of the history of thinkers, because that's where they belong and that's where they deserve. But because we're taught to be too humble, and it kind of goes against our own self-interest of defending ourselves, of always feeling that insecurity or that like we're not good enough and all that. I don't really, suffer from any of that stuff like this. What's that chingadera they call when this, what is it they call when it's like people feel like you don't belong? ¿Cómo se llama? Yeah, the imposter syndrome. I don't believe in any of that.
Yeah, and
I don't believe it. If anything, the only thing I probably suffer, I'm telling you, this is like therapy for me. The only thing that probably I suffer from is this like survivor syndrome. It's like those people that are in war and then they live and their comrades die, and they live and they feel guilty.
That's
so
our resilience.
Yeah.
Tanya?
Yeah. No, I wanted to add that's our resilience.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Resilience.
Our Yaqui tradition, and this is really beautiful because it relates to what Roberto talks about, which is walking in beauty. And for Yaquis, blood represents life, struggle, but they also like transform into a beautiful flower. So when he said walking in beauty, and I was like, wow, that's my blood drips literally from this war battle. But the more you fight, the more you love, the more you respect.
One thing I could add about that, actually 2 things, is the concept of footprints.
Yes.
I became a runner about 15 years ago or so when we were battling ethnic studies. And
ethnic studies
bad. One of the things that I learned as a runner is it's like a metaphor of life, is that when you run, you leave footprints, And so this concept of living in beauty, for example, or creation resistance, you can say it, but if you don't live it, in other words, look at the person's footprints, and that'll tell you whether something is true or not the words that we say, I was also had a second thought, and that is about, like you mentioned about respecting elders. One of the things that I think is very much missing is that there's a school of thought out there that's like, they remind me of the Inquisition or the Crusades, you know, like what is true versus, you know, that, you know, this idea that there's one truth and they have to find it. And if it's not true, you denounce it. Instead, you know, we should always look at ourselves, and me and Tanya talk about this all the time, that we should always see ourselves as teachers. I mean, students. You know, we always should see ourselves as students. We're always learning. And if you find somebody that maybe you disagree with, well, it's not for you to denounce. Instead, maybe we learn from it, right? You find somebody else and maybe you can compare perhaps, right? But there's no need to, like, you know, it's almost like creating a blacklist, they call, you know, they even use that word, right? But the point is, it's not so to isolate people and say, look, these are the bad ones. Instead, you know, it's not so that we compete or denounce, but rather, yeah, we learn, you know, we learn. And anyway, that's what I think that we need is this thirst for knowledge without judgment, you know, just learn, you know. And if it's something that's false and really bad, it'll become evident by those footprints, as opposed simply, you know, here's who you're going to denounce. Because I see that, especially on social media, you know, people denouncing people. Oh, this one's authentic, this one isn't. I said, you know what? It'll come out. You know, you don't need to do that. And that, because it's part of, well, that's social media as a whole. But it's like a trend, you know, and I don't think we need that. It's like pitting Rudy Acuña versus Juan Gomez Quiñones as an example, you know, kind of like, you don't need that. Just learn.
Yeah.
And if you agree with something, great. If you don't, just put it to the side.
Right. No, definitely. And there's a great comment on the chat in terms of our ancestors and the footprint by Dr. Lara Medina. Appreciate that. Always teaching us, you know, the ways. Someone asked a question, because we're almost to the finish line, because happy hour is going to close. I have to run, you know, because Cinco de Mayo. I'm just kidding. Somebody asked a question about prisons and stating that before colonization, many cultures around the world, you know, didn't have prisons. So what now that after colonization we have that, you know, what was something that was lost in terms of, I guess, the people that
it's called accountability.
Yeah,
people were accountable to each other. There were no prisons, there were no locks, etc. People were responsible to each other, and there was a sense of communality, you know, that is we as opposed to I, you know. And this we learned from, there's different native traditions that teach these things. You know, we also can't be romanticizing or be romantic about it. I mean, it is a different society today, you know, but that doesn't mean that we can't transfer the same values. That is, we can have the we in us, in our philosophies, in our ethos, you know. It's the I. That's where the problem is. It's everyone for themselves, or what do they call it? The rat race, all those things, you know. You know, you can't stop the modernization, you know. At the same time, those values can remain. You know, I always tell people, because a lot of times people take a story literal, and I would say, no, a story, you know what a story is like for storytellers? It's a means to teach a value, an ethos, an ethic, you know? And that's why In Lakesh teaches the ethos of respect, you know? The story, the creation story of Quetzalcoatl and the ants and the maize, what is that story? The story is teaching us to share, you know? The ants have the corn, and in the end, they share it with the human beings, you know? So it's teaching values, you know? And so, you know, I'll say something that may sound controversial or maybe out of context, but like, this is what I used to tell my students. Okay, like, you know, in the West, you know, there's the Bible, right? And in the West, it's a lot of stories, you know, memory perhaps. But the point is, animals often are part of stories. And so I tell my students, I go, how many of you remember the story about a man and a woman in a garden or a jungle, and there's a talking serpent there, talking snake, you know? And they're like, that sounds like Garden of Eden, you know? And I said, okay, well, look, so you have a talking snake there, right? So when we talk about Quetzalcoatl, you know, in the creation story about the ants, you know, it's like some people will be like, come on, ants can't talk. I go, oh, but serpents can. Snakes in the garden can speak. Yeah, in other words, that's missing the point. The point is there's a story being told, you know, and it's told through metaphor and often through animals. But it's again to teach us to be better human beings, because none of us are perfect. You know, we all make mistakes. But I think, and that's why those footprints are important, because you may know how to quote, you know, a holy book of any religion, but if you don't live that life, what does it matter? You know. Anyway, thank you to everybody. I know we probably might have a minute or two or so, but at least I want to thank everybody.
No, I do want to say some things about both of you. So I want to just thank both of you. This is actually an eye-opening event. I actually didn't think it was going to go like this. I thought it was just going to be another event where people just read from their text and it just puts people to sleep. And the only reason I record them is it helps me sleep at night, you know, like at these conferences. But I just want to say something about our people and who we are. And, you know, we're you know, Roberto is like a brother to me, you know, and when my son needed help in the paper about maize, you know, he's graduating from Amherst College, and every time I think about that, I think about Pinchy Biden hasn't forgiven our loans. I'm kind of worried right now. So after this, I have another job that I have to collect cans and make some money.
Cinco de Mayo, you're gonna do a lot.
Yeah. So it was about maize, and I was like, well, yeah, interview him, because he, you know, he writes about that, he teaches it, he practices it, he has conferences, and then I realized after reading, you know, what he wrote, I was like, wow, this is deep. You know, this is, you know, so for those of us who eat tortillas, you know, we're practicing a tradition that goes back thousands of years, you know, and it's a circle, it's not a square. You know, with the white people, the sandwich is square, but for the indigenous, it's a circle, you know, so they're all points being equal to the center. You know, so our traditions, our ways of being, even though we're in the city, for example, here in the belly of the beast, we are connected. You know, we are connected. It's just a matter where we find value. Where we, you know, do I have a PhD from Berkeley? Yes. Do I remind everybody that I have it from Berkeley? Yes. But at the end of the day, my mother, who was illiterate, is like 10 times smarter than me, 10 times more driven than me, 10 times passed away, you know, 10 times more wiser than me, because that knowledge is the knowledge that was passed down from generation to generation, you know, and we need to appreciate that knowledge. And we need to embrace it, like those values that they give us, and not, you know, follow this path about whoever accumulates more degrees or more wealth is like more valued. You go down that path, you're going to turn orange, you know. So for me, it's for us to go forward, we need to go backwards, you know. When I was in my 20s, I used to go to the sweat lodges with the Lakotas, and there were some people someone was asking one of the elders, you know, about wisdom and about the truth, and he says, just look down on your feet, you know, just don't look anywhere else but down, you know, and you'll find it there. So I think for us, our people, those of us who are indigenous, those of us who are Asian, those of us who are natives, those of us who are African Americans, and even the Irish and the Italians, you know, before they lost their way, is that we're about the collective, we're about the communal, we're about not just the immediate family, but extended family, you know, and it's just a different way of being. And people don't appreciate that, and they don't value that. But that's their problem. You know, we need to go forward, we need to go backwards, and not lose sight of that, you know, in terms of not backwards in a negative way, but in terms of going back to those traditions that are about generosity, you know, about being, about sharing. You go to the poorest, I don't know why I'm screaming, but you go to the poorest village. You go to the poorest village in Chiapas, like I went. And you go to the poorest family in that village, and if all they have is a chicken and you're there to visit, they're going to give it to you. Y ni preguntan, nomás te sirven.
Yes.
If you don't understand what I'm saying, take a Spanish class. They don't even ask. ¿Tienes hambre? You get there at 10, ni pregunta, ¿tienes hambre, mijo? Nomás te dan de comer, you know. And then you visit another, and then they just, and that's the beauty of our people. And so we need to measure ourselves based on our standards, our morals, our ethics, not theirs. You know, because theirs is a losing tradition, is a decaying tradition. There's no this idea of Western civilization, like Gandhi said, that's a great idea, you know, because there's no such thing as that. How can you be civilized if you behave in barbaric ways, you know, putting kids in cages? You know, so to me, it's people like my mother, you know, my sisters, the most generous people that I know, the smartest people in the world that never went to university, never went to high school, but they sacrificed everything for their family. So it's about that. I strongly believe that if you follow those paths, and it's not just about being Mexican, you could be Salvadorian, you could be Guatemalteco. It's about being true to yourself and to your people, and being in one with them, and not losing sight, not thinking like you're special because you went to the university, and so on and so forth. So with that said, I just want to thank Roberto, Tania.
Can I
Thank you.
give I wanted to give a quick story, and I don't know if Tanya might have an exit.
Sí.
Oppose.
But
But I got inspired by your shouting. So no. So I wanted to end with, because you know, I if anything, I'm a storyteller more than anything, and I wanted to end with a story about when my Maiz book came out. You know, I went to an elementary school for 3-year-olds to 8-year-olds. And that was the Mexica Academy. And then I went to another school called Davis Elementary. And in that school, I presented there. And this little black kid, he was from the Dominican Republic, I believe. And his teacher had told me about not only him, but his whole class, her class. And anyway, so when I told the story about the maiz and the tortilla, and the first thing I asked everybody is, how many of you ever eaten a tamal? You know, and of course, everybody's hand shot up. And anyway, so then after I presented that story, that little kid raised his hand and he says, is that my story too? The one about the ants and Quetzalcoatl and all that. And I go, where are you from? And again, it was either Jamaica or Dominican Republic. But anyway, he said one of the two, right? And he says, you know where the word maiz comes from? And he's like wide-eyed, like no. I said, maiz comes from where you come from. And all of a sudden his eyes got big, and you know, and I said, you know, the maiz, you of course it's your story. Maiz comes from where you're from, you know. Anyway, for about the next half hour, I couldn't get rid of the guy. The guy was clinging on to me. We took about 50 photographs, and I just felt awesome, because what you're saying right now, it doesn't matter our race or our color, you know, because if you live on this continent, you can be indigenized. And I always say we can be all cultures too, right? We all have a little bit of everything, but also the fact that in my opinion, the maiz does indigenize us, and it makes us humans, you know? And so that was that proof. And now what I wanted to say or end with our birthday colleague here is that, again, she was going to do a couple of yoga poses, you know, based on this topic. So I don't know if she can do that, or if she's going to say goodbye or what. So Tanya, do you have any goodbyes or whatever?
Yes. I don't know. Do you guys want to just end with a little prayer meditation? That'd be cute. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to plant all feet again, heart chest out, roll shoulders back, head skull up, hands palm center. We're going to inhale, look up, reach with all your hands and connect with the sun, the will, that guidance, but also in a compassionate, loving, flowing way with Koyoshalki.
By the way, your camera's off.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't turn it on. And then we're going to exhale back to middle. We're going to inhale, look to the right. And here we're going to connect with our breath, our oxygen, our knowledge, our spirit, our creation. Quetzalcoatl, but also Quelatzli. And we're going to exhale back to middle. And we're going to inhale, look down And here we're going to connect with our Mother Earth, our grounding, our healing. And we're going to exhale back to middle. Inhale, look to the left. And here I like to connect with the heart, with the shedding, with the transformation, with Chipetotec, but also Tlazoteo, that rebirthing, that remaking of yourself. We're gonna exhale back to middle, hands palm center. Inhale fully. And here, I like to connect with our obsidian mirror, that Tezcatlipoca, that mirror, that reflection, that you are my other me, y tú eres mi otro yo. And it's here in balance that we find that love, that light, that medicine, that humbleness, and that respect. Inhale fully. Exhale completely. And next exhale, help me close this beautiful space with an Om. Inhale fully. Om. With much reverence and respect. Namaste. Chokyutesia. Desde el fondo de mi corazón, mil gracias por el espacio. Mil gracias for your beautiful words. And mil gracias, Roberto, always for sharing your space and your words and your wisdom. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to yours. Chokyutesia. That was it.
Thank you.
No.
Alvaro, you have to shout.
Okay, buenas noches, everybody. Well, I just want to, I wanted to end it with Tania's words, but buenas noches.
Sounds good.
Have a good night.
Okay, we'll talk to everybody later. I gotta run somewhere.